everybody, welcome to Cheeseology. I'm Adam. In this video, we're going to be making Havarti. We can thank Hanne Nielsen from Denmark in the 1800s for creating this wonderful cheese. You can find Havarti with a variety of spices. In this one, I'm going to be adding dill, which is pretty traditional. I'm going to be adding onion powder and also smoked paprika. I think it's going to be really good. I think those flavors will complement each other. You can find it with things like jalapenos and other things. I was thinking about jalapenos, but I didn't want to overpower it. So I don't want to make a pepper cheese. I want to make Havarti. So stick around and let's get cheese making. For this cheese, we're just going to be using 1 pack of C101 Culture. That's the only culture we'll use. I'm going to make a 4-gallon batch. So I have 4 gallons of whole vitamin D milk. I'm going to add that to my pot, heat it up to 86 degrees, and then we'll add our C101 Culture. We're going to let it sit for about 45 minutes so the culture can start doing its thing and converting lactose to lactic acid, and then we will add the rennet. So first thing we'll do though is we'll get our milk going. All right, we've hit 86 degrees, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my milk off the heat. If you're doing this on a gas stove, you can just kill the heat or kill the flame, and that'll be fine. The electric will keep heating this up. Don't want that. So I have my packet of C101 starter culture, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle this along the top, and then we're going to let it rehydrate for about 2 minutes, and then we'll stir it in. If we start stirring it in right away, it could clump up, and we don't want that. We want it to rehydrate, and then we'll stir it in. So that is in. We'll give it 2 minutes. We'll stir slowly, up and down, back and forth, and then we'll get that stirred in real good, and then we'll wrap something around this pot so it stays as close to 86 as possible, and we'll let this sit for 45 minutes. Okay, so I'm stirring in my culture. Later on in the process, we're actually going to do what's called a wash curd technique. If you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know what I'm talking about. It involves removing some of the whey and replacing it with water. For this cheese, we'll be removing about 15% or 25% of the volume of milk of whey. So for 4 gallons, if I remove 25%, I'm removing about 1 gallon. A little less than 1 gallon is fine. We're going to replace it with 130-degree water. What we're doing there is we're removing some of the food source for the culture. So what you end up with is a little bit less of an acidic cheese, slightly sweeter. When I say sweeter, you're not going to think sweet like something very sweet, but and it'll also give it somewhat of an elastic texture as well. If you made the Alpine style cheese that in one of my more recent videos, that's the way that turned out. We did the same technique. So yeah, we'll be doing that here in a little while. All right, I have this stirred in pretty good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thermometer out. I'm going to put a lid on this, and then I'm going to wrap it with something. I'm going to wait 45 minutes. We'll come back, and we'll proceed to the next step. All right, the milk's been sitting with our culture in it for 45 minutes. Now what we want to do is add a ½ teaspoon of rennet. I'm using animal rennet. And what we're going to want to do is stir this up real well. We want to use up and down motions to make sure it's thoroughly mixed in with the whole milk. We're going to stir this up real well for about 1 minute or so, and then we're going to put our lid back on and then wrap our pot back up to try to keep it warm. We're going to let this sit for about 40 minutes. We should have a nice curd formed at that point, and then we will cut the curd and proceed from there. Okay, our milk has been sitting for 40 minutes after we added the rennet and stirred it in real well. Now what we want to do is check for a clean break. You just want to insert whatever you're using to cut the curd up in, and then turn it sideways and lift up a little bit. And if there's a clear separation, then you have a curd that's formed properly and ready to proceed to the next step. So let's check for a clean break, and then we'll go from there. Okay, what we want to do now is, now that we have a good clean break, we want to cut our curd into about 3/8 inch cubes. Just create a series of vertical and horizontal lines. And then you want to let it sit for about 3 to 5 minutes. What's happening during that time are the cuts that you're making are kind of healing. You want to let it just rest for that short amount of time. And then what we'll do from there is we will gently stir the curd. You don't want to go fast, very gentle, for about 15 minutes. In the meantime, after you do the initial cut here and you're waiting that 3 to 5 minutes, you can start heating up a pot of water. We want about a gallon of water at 130 degrees. And we're gonna add that once we remove some of the whey here a little bit later. Okay, now that our cut curd has been sitting for a few minutes, now we're just gonna start stirring very gently for about 15 minutes. Now that we've completed the initial stir, what we wanna do now is remove about a gallon of the whey. As you can see, I'm almost there. What we're gonna do after we remove the gallon of whey is we're gonna stir for about another 15 minutes. And then we will add our 130 degree water over about 10 minutes. And it should bring the temperature up to about 95, 100 degrees. That's what we want. So we'll finish removing the whey and then we'll stir for another 15. I finished stirring for the second round of 15 minutes after I removed the whey, a gallon of whey. Now what I'm gonna do is start adding my 130 degree water over 10 minutes. So I'm gonna take about a third of a gallon, add that, stir it in a little bit. I'm gonna put my thermometer in. A couple minutes later, I'll add another third, and then a couple minutes after that, I'll add the last third. Overall, we wanna add it over 10 minutes, as I mentioned. And our ending temperature should be about 95 to 100 degrees. If for some reason you don't hit that, we're gonna put it back on the heat if we need to. We do wanna get that heat up to that temperature. That'll help dry out the curds to where we need it for this cheese. So let's start adding about a third of the 130 degree water right now. First, I'll see what my current temperature is, see how much it's dropped. Looks like we're about 80 degrees, maybe a hair under. So it's only lost about 6 degrees or so. Actually, it's still rising. Yeah, about 80 degrees, so it lost about 6 degrees. So that's not bad considering it's been off the heat. We've been letting it sit through the bacteria doing its thing, and then also through the rennet coagulating the milk and the curd. So that's not bad. Now I'm gonna add the first 130 degree addition. Gently stir this in. Once we get all of the water added and bring the temperature back up, we're actually gonna add an ounce of salt right into this pot like this. We usually don't salt it this time. This process is a little bit different for this Havarti, but we are gonna add an ounce of salt and then we'll stir for about 15 minutes. 15 to 20 minutes, somewhere around there. So it looks like we're at about 90 degrees. I'm not gonna hit the 95 to 100, so I am gonna return it to the heat source. Perfectly fine. And once we hit about 98 degrees, I'll take it off and I'll stir it for about 15 minutes. Okay, we brought our cheese up to the required temperature. As I said, I did need to put it on the heat a little bit. That's okay. Now I'm gonna add 1 ounce of salt right into the whey. I'm gonna stir it in. Now we're gonna wanna stir for another 15 minutes or so. About 15, 20 minutes, a slow stir. Just keep it moving. After that, we will drain and add our spices. Now what we wanna do, that we've finished our final stir, is we wanna have our colander and cheesecloth or butter muslin ready to go. What we're gonna do is just drain this, and then once it's drained, we're gonna add our spices to the curd. You wanna break up the curd. It might have lumped up a little bit, or by the time you drain it and put it in there, it might have lumped up a little bit. So you wanna break it up, make sure there's not solid lumps so the spices can get into all pieces of the curd. So we'll drain this now and then we'll add our spices. Okay, for this cheese, now that this is drained, I'm gonna use a tablespoon of dill, a teaspoon of smoked paprika, and also a teaspoon of onion powder. I'm just estimating these amounts. You can judge for yourself, put in what you want, but that's what I'm gonna do for this cheese. I'm gonna start by putting in half of each one of those, mix it up real good, and then I'll put the other half in. So half tablespoon of dill in, put a half teaspoon of onion powder, and then a half teaspoon of the smoked paprika. I'll see how red this is after I do the initial mix. I might only use a half teaspoon all together. That was a 1/4 teaspoon. So I'm just gonna mix this up first and then we'll see what we have. Yeah, I think I'm just going to use a 1/2 teaspoon of the smoked paprika. I don't want a super red cheese, but I think a teaspoon might be too much. You can use your judgment again. You can put whatever you want in this. You can experiment with different herbs, whatever you want to do. I think these three will work very well together. I've never made it with these three together. So this is new for me as well. So I'm going to put the other 1/2 of the dill in, and I'll put the other 1/2 of the onion powder in, and then the other 1/4 teaspoon of smoked paprika. Okay, we're just going to get this mixed in real well, and then we're going to start pressing. Make sure you break up the clumps. If you leave clumps when you go to cut this and you cut through the middle of a clump, there's not going to be any spice there, obviously. So you definitely want it so there's no clumps, and you make sure you get all the matted down curves on the bottom of the colander as well. Break those up. Really want to make sure this is thoroughly mixed in so it's nice and even spice throughout the whole cheese. Okay, I think we are mixed in real well. It looks nice and evenly spread throughout. It's not super red. I can definitely see the dill. This looks really good. So I'm going to get it set up with my cheese press. We're going to start with 8 pounds of pressure, but I'll go over that here in a second once I get all set up. Okay, you can see I am set up here with my cheese press. What I'm going to do is I'm hanging weight on my cheese press. That will equate to 8 pounds. We want to press for 8 pounds for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take it out, rewrap it, flip it, and then we'll press it 16 pounds for 2 hours. Over those 2 hours, every 30 minutes, you want to flip your cheese and rewrap it. After that, then we'll continue to the next step. All right, we finished all of our pressing. As you can see, it looks like a pretty good cheese. I like the amount of dill that's spread out. I think that's a good amount that we've added in here. You probably won't get a super smooth surface just because of the amount of weight we're using. You don't want to crush this with weight, so I think this looks about right. What we're going to do now is we're going to put it back into the form without the cheesecloth, and then we're going to submerge it in water at about 65 degrees overnight. What we're doing is we're slowly reducing the acidity, making it more acidic. So right now it's at about 6. We want to get it to about 5.5. This should probably take overnight. Where I'm at right now, it's early in the day, so I'm going to check it later on this evening, maybe early evening. But I expect that I'll have to wait until first thing in the morning to take it out. Once we take it out, we'll put it in a salt brine solution. That's how we're going to salt this cheese for about 5 to 6 hours total, about 2.5 hours on each side. And then we can let it dry for about a day, and then it goes in our aging space. So right now, I'm just going to put this back into the form, and I am super happy with how this turned out. This looks great. I see a little bit of red here and there from the paprika. Smells fabulous. I can definitely smell the dill. I wanted the dill to be a little bit more pronounced than obviously the onion powder and paprika. Those two are just to complement the dill. So I am really excited about this. So we're gonna put this in our water, let it sit overnight, most likely, till the pH is down to 5.2, and then we'll start salting. Okay, it's the next day. What we did was we pressed our cheese based on the pressing schedule that I gave you and the weights. And then after that, I put it in cool, just regular water and soaked it. Originally, I said to do it overnight. When I made this cheese yesterday, it was very early in the day, so I was done around noon. So I didn't want it to go too long because what's happening is it's still building acidity. It's still getting more acidic. So the purpose of the water is to slow down the acidity and to slowly build that acidity with an ending pH of about 5.2. Last night at around 8 o'clock at night, I was right about there. So what I did was I made my brine. So I took it out of the water, made my brine. This is how we're going to get salt into the cheese. With a gallon of water, 2¼ pounds of salt, a tablespoon of calcium chloride, and then a teaspoon of white vinegar. That's the same brine that we use most times when salting a cheese, if we're using that method. So I brined it for 5 hours total, 2.5 hours. I put it in, put a little salt on top because it's going to float. It's in salt water. After 2.5 hours, I flipped it, put a little bit more salt on top, and then after 2.5 hours, I was done. And now it's been air drying, and this is what we have. We have a beautiful wheel of Havarti. You can see the dill is really showing up in the cheese. I don't think it's too much. I don't think it's too little. I think it's perfect. And also I see a little bit of redness here. That's from the smoked paprika. The cheese smells absolutely wonderful. I cannot wait to eat this. So what we'll want to do is we'll want to age this for about 3 months. If you're making one this thick, probably about 2 to 3 months in your aging space at about 90% humidity and the normal 54 degrees, 56, somewhere right around there. Every 2 to 3 days, you want to take a light brine solution. Just use like a tablespoon of salt to a quart of water. Every 2 to 3 days, you want to wipe it down. We want to keep this cheese pretty clean. We don't want it to grow all funky like a blue cheese and get all kinds of crazy different molds on here. We want to keep it clean. So every 2 to 3 days, you want to do that, and that will keep the mold off. The salt will fight the mold, and it should stay clean. But that's it. So I think this is going to turn out great. Thank you so much for watching. If you're not a subscriber, please do so, and I'd really appreciate that. And happy cheese making.